Hi, and welcome to my review of day 2 of the information coming out regarding World of Warcraft from Blizzcon. From Blizzcon. Now, there's a lot of really interesting stuff has come out. I've watched a number of the sort of panel interviews and things like that. And lots of stuff that was interesting to me. But what I'm going to focus on is just stuff that refers to World of Warcraft and PvE specifically, because that's what this particular channel is about. So it's not going to include any information on PvP or any sort of art or design type decisions, unless, of course, it impacts on the here and now for Legion PvE, because that's what my main focus is. Now, in regards some of the things that were discussed that I'm not going to go into too much detail or maybe even any detail here, because some of them I think need real detailed discussion in their own separate video, so I'll be bringing those out over the coming week. That would include things like talents. They said a few things about talents that are really worth analysing, I think. Player housing, even though it was only a throwaway comment, it's worth looking at that. And even the relevance of having WoW realms at all these days. So in terms of what was there, I'm first of all going to talk about something that wasn't there. This, for me, is like the elephant in the room. There's not been a great deal of discussion about it, so maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just something for me. There was a really interesting panel discussion on the development of Blizzard, because it's Blizzard's 25th anniversary year, you know, and there's Diablo's 20th anniversary year, and it's the 10th BlizzCon, so lots of little anniversaries. So there was a theme on that. And they had a panel of various people that have been there, including the founders and people who have been there from the very early days. Bar one very notable figure, Chris Metzen. Now, I said at the time when Chris Metzen resigned that I hope they do something really special for him at BlizzCon. And this, for me, would have been the ideal thing, that he be on that panel. He's been there from relatively early days. Now, of course, I'm assuming the reason he wasn't there was his decision. I don't think he's been frozen out or anything. Of course, we don't actually know the real reason why he's left Blizzard. We don't need to. It's none of our business. But I just have to sort of say I thought it was a shame that either he didn't feel he wanted to go or that it wasn't sort of thought that he should be there. For whatever reason, he wasn't there. I don't know what that was about. But I just found it was a shame. I just thought that would have been really, really good. I'd have really enjoyed that panel a whole lot more if Chris Metzen was on it. But anyway, more about something that came up on that panel towards the end, because one thing that was said was really interesting to me. So in terms of what has been discussed, especially at the Q&A, the WoW Q&A on the second day. First of all, they are not considering gnome paladins, druids or shamans. Of course not. Unfortunately, they did leave it a little open-ended, as in not considering it at this point. A little bit of a disappointing addition there. Whether that's just there to keep people quiet or whether they actually are just keeping it open-ended, I don't know. Because to be honest with you, if they take that step too far, then they might as well just allow anything. This is absolutely ridiculous. To even entertain the fact that at some point in the future this might be a thing. Really, Blizzard, what are you doing? Now, in terms of armor sets, they were saying that, because some people were asking about updating old armor sets, they said they don't want to do that. A couple of reasons. They said they prefer to do newer armor sets inspired by the older ones. Yes, I can certainly believe that, and I'll go on to that in a moment. But they also said they don't want to risk people being unhappy with changes to their old armor sets. I don't believe this would ever happen. I think if all you're going to do is high-resolution versions of the older sets, everyone would be delighted with that. For example, they took when they updated the actual character race models, all the ones pre-Cataclysm were updated. And although they said they were a little nervous about the reaction there because, they don't want to get anything a little bit wrong, they did change it, and they've changed it, and there wasn't a huge backlash against that. In fact, people were overwhelmingly positive about it. I certainly was, because my character looked like he'd been smashed in the face with an iron in terms of the original character models. I made my character in somewhat of a hurry. But So yeah, I don't believe that. I think if they made high resolution versions of the older armor sets, people would like that. However, I'm not saying they should do that because I absolutely take on board what they want to do. One thing they've said they're going to do with the tier 20 sets, that is the Tomb of Sargeras sets, not the Nighthold sets, is that would be tier 20, wouldn't it? I'm not getting that wrong. I can't even remember what tier we're on now. But the Tomb of Sargeras sets, which I'm sure are tier 20, they are tier 20. They're going to be inspired by the old Black Temple tier 6 sets, which a lot of people are quite happy about, but I sort of take that as inspired by. And I can understand it's quite hard to keep coming up with new designs, and they did come up with some killer designs in the older days as well. They've always consistently come up with, all right, some sets you look at them and think, ooh, no. And then some sets, you're like, wow, that's absolutely amazing. And the tier 6 ones, I think, across almost all of the classes, if not all of them, were pretty special. They were pretty good. So to produce, presumably not just high resolution versions of them, but I guess they'll throw in a few extra bangs and whistles as well. As long as they don't overdo it, because I don't want them to feel that they have to put extra things onto them just so that they can say it was inspired by it and not just a straight copy. I would rather they didn't ruin it, but just producing high resolution versions of them, I think people will go, yeah. In fact, I might even stop transmogging to things that were produced 8 years ago, if that happens. At the moment, I'm using a set that was more than 8 years ago. Backpack size. Now, this is a perennial issue. They said they might actually be able to increase the backpack size because when the game first came out of vanilla, we had a backpack that was 16 slots, as we still do now. We've been able to increase our overall backpack size by adding bags. And in vanilla, the usual bags you got at level cap were like 16 slotters. So everything was 16 slot. It was possible to get an 18 slot, wasn't it? It was very expensive. There was Onyxia Hide backpack was 18. You could get that for Onyxia. I got a few of those. And there was a crafted one as well. I can't remember the details of that. Was that the core hand bag? I can't remember. But there was 18 slots possible. And then with each expansion, it's been up until Legion. Actually, it wasn't carried on in Legion. It's been possible to create bigger and bigger bags. But the backpack remained annoyingly, frustratingly at 16 slots. And the reason was always given that the people that when they were making the game, there were a lot of corners cut, as there would be. As you'd expect it was a huge undertaking. In fact, they were talking in the panel. Sorry, itchy nose. They were talking in the panel about how the fact that when they were doing World of Warcraft in the first year, they basically had to put everything else on hold. StarCraft 2 was on hold. Everything was on hold because they had to get everyone at Blizzard, no matter what game they were normally working on, to work on World of Warcraft. So it's fairly obvious that they were cutting corners where they could just to get the finished product. Totally understandable. And the problem is, of course, some of the people doing the code for various bits were no longer working at Blizzard. And the concern was that monkeying about with the code for the backpack size could break a whole host of other things, and it'd be constantly chasing your tail. But they've now come to the conclusion that it's not as challenging as they first thought. So although they're not promising to increase the backpack size anytime soon, they have indicated that it is something that could possibly be done. So we might in the future look forward to a backpack that maybe dynamically scales with each expansion. It gets a little bit bigger each expansion. That's got to be welcome. I mean, to be honest with you, it's probably less of an issue in Legion, because although in Legion we haven't got bigger bags, they've done quite a lot over the last few expansions, to be fair, but especially in Legion, I think they've done quite a lot to reduce the pressure on our bags anyway, because we've had, first of all, we have the pets mount and the pets tab, the mounts tab, the heirlooms tab. Now we've got the wardrobe, so we don't even need to keep old armor sets anymore. We can trash them because we've got the look of them permanently in. We had the void storage some time ago, but that's just an extra bank, let's be honest, that costs gold. So they have done quite a lot over the last few years to reduce the pressure on it. But of course, if at the other end we can actually increase the size of the backpack, maybe even, what wasn't mentioned, the number of tabs in the bank. Maybe we could get a few more tabs in the bank as well. That would help a lot as well. So, yeah, so that's encouraging news, I think. Discussions about professions came up. Now, they talked a few things about professions. I think, by and large, they explained their philosophy for the questing of professions, which is Absolutely great. For me personally, it's a pain in the ass because my professions tend to be done. I have my trade outs, so little outs that I don't really do anything on other than make myself self-sufficient. And now I have to do all the quests to get the patterns. But overall, it's a really good thing. It's definitely a good feature to the game. That because there are people for whom professions is the main part of their game. That they don't do organised raiding or high-level dungeons or PvP. What they do are professions, and I really like professions in any MMO, and I like it in this one, and I think it's really good for those people. It sort of sets out the more determined crafters and tradespeople apart from the rest, which I think is a really good feature. But one of the things they didn't seem so happy about was like, there was a couple of things they said. First of all, like Obliterum, they said the idea of Obliterum was okay. But they didn't think it's quite so good. The idea of trashing your gear in the Obliterum Forge doesn't seem quite so great. They seemed a bit hesitant on that one. I have to say, I don't really see that. But then again, maybe that's because I'm an enchanter and I've been trashing gear for years for reagents. So for me, it's no different. It's just like being able to trash gear for a different type of reagent. So I don't know. What do non-enchanters think about it? Is it a feature that you particularly like or not? But the other thing they said about professions, in terms of gathering professions, is the question was asked about, should we have to choose gathering professions? Should they be counted in the cap of 2 professions that we have like lumped in with all the production professions? And they sort of conceded that it is something that comes up a lot of the time in discussion, internally as well as externally. They do talk about it internally a lot as well. So although there's no plans to change, it is the sort of thing that in the future is a possibility, because they do genuinely talk about maybe treating professions a bit like the secondary professions, in that you can just have them all. And then the cap, the limit of 2 is just for production professions. That would work, I have to say, because in like Elder Scrolls Online, for example, you don't even have to choose professions, but you do sort of, if you want to specialise, limit yourself. They have quite a good way of dealing with professions. But everyone has the gathering ones. So I think the thing with gathering professions is there's no immediate plans. Don't expect it to change this expansion, and it may never change, but it is the sort of thing they talk about. So now, pet battles. I sort of face-palmed when this was said, but then I thought about it, and I thought, well, yeah. I'm not into pet battles myself, so it will make no difference to me. But they do have plans for expanding the pet battle system. Pet battle dungeons. Now, they didn't say very much about this, but I think we can sort of guess the inference here. I'm assuming it would be a group situation, not just a solo thing. Because at first I sort of had this image in my mind of a bit like an old game show that was in the UK when I was a kid. But this thing about where you go into a pet battle, but instead of battling another, like a grasshopper and stuff like that, that you're taking your pet through sort of like an old style computer game adventure maze and beating up things, encounters that you come across and stuff like that, and navigating through this maze to a chest at the end, which is your reward. I did have visions of that. It may not be that, though. It might actually be a group thing where, again, you have an actual simplified dungeon format where, like, you and a few friends with their pets are battling things. But because they haven't given many details on it, first of all, it might imply that it's not coming in Legion, that it might be next expansion. Because you've got to remember, they're working on expansions in parallel now. This might be just something they've thrown up from the team that's working on the following expansion. I can see something like this getting an equal amount of stick and praise. But I think, to be fair, pet battles is the one feature that Blizzard have brought in that won't appeal to everyone, that you actually don't have to do if it doesn't appeal to you. There's certain features they've brought into the game where, although they say you've got a choice, you don't have to do it, you sort of do if you want to go into particular types of content. Whereas pet battles has always been the thing that actually, do you know what, you don't have to do it. And so I think that's fine. But I think some people will really go for it. I think some people will like it. But the complaints about, like, there'll be a lot of complaints equally about where the game is going, I'm sure. They're opening themselves up for a lot of stick on this one. Cross-faction cooperation came up. So what they've said is they think the faction distinction is essential in World of Warcraft. And they are right. It is. It's World of Warcraft. Warcraft is supposed to be the Alliance versus the Horde. That's what Warcraft was, and that's what World of Warcraft is supposed to be based around. Unfortunately, it's a PvE focus. Well, that's not unfortunate. It's good that it's a PvE focus game, because I think it does that very well. And it goes out of the window because every expansion we have this strong storyline where the Alliance and the Horde basically have to work together against a common threat to Azeroth. This just happens every expansion. And to be honest, for me, it's getting tiresome that in every expansion you have this story cycle where the Horde and the Alliance come together. They have to work together against this existential third threat. And then it's almost like someone pipes up, oh, we're getting a bit pally between the Horde and the Alliance here. We are supposed to be at war with each other. And everyone else goes, oh, yeah. And they just have some character do something heinous to the other faction, like blowing up Theramore or something like that. So, yeah, you just end up having to make bad guys out of one faction or the other to get them back at war again after they've done this cooperation. And it's just this constant cycle of cooperation. Someone does something that pisses the other side off, back to war again. Next threat comes along, cooperation. It doesn't quite work. It doesn't work. And it's getting, for me, tedious. But as they say, the whole concept of the game is Alliance versus Horde, and it sort of is. So I don't know what they do with it. I ain't got the answers to it, so I'm going to lay off them on that one. There was a little bit of waffle about why you can have holy priests as undead, but not paladins. Even though I had an inkling there was an undead paladin in a quest sometime. I can't remember. Maybe I'm wrong. I have to check that out. But their reasoning did seem a bit fumbled, and it sort of seemed to be the thing about we'll get back to you type thing. I don't know. That was a bit messy, that one. It was something to do with the fact that paladins use the Holy Light offensively, not just defensively. So that meant it was all right for undead holy priests, because they just use it to help, but not for paladins, because what? One little thing that I'm going to sort of talk about in more detail in its own little video. They talked about mythic raiding being sort of basically the last bastion of server identity, because, you know, a lot of other stuff is basically cross-faction. Now, I personally would say that server identity died years ago, and I think, you know, there are other reasons why they preserve server identity. I don't think it has anything to do with community anymore, because I don't think there is one. Because you look at Realm forums now, and there's very little happens on there. People, I think, just post messages that then just doesn't get read by anyone. So in terms of other things, the class mounts that were announced in the first day, it was mentioned that there will be some, not all, but some colour variants for different specs for some classes. Quite how widespread this will be, I don't know, but yeah, there'll be some colour variation for the different specs. Demon Hunters, there are a few interesting stats on Demon Hunters. One of them was very surprising to me. The first was that they said about 2/3 of all accounts rolled a Demon Hunter. Well, that's not surprising, at least just to do the opening levels, you know, to see the storyline. I can understand that. But what surprised me was 30% of those level to 110. So what that basically means is, what they're saying is that 20% of all active accounts have got a level 110 Demon Hunter. That's a lot. It's 1 in 5 active accounts has got a level capped Demon Hunter. Now, there's a hell of a lot of Demon Hunters, okay? You can't swing a cat without hitting 3 Demon Hunters in the face. But I was surprised it was as many as that. I really am. It's miles, massive. Not very good news for Demon Hunter players that want to get into groups, I wouldn't have thought. Quite tricky, given there's so many of them, to a penny. And another little interesting statistic, this one I'm less surprised about, is that 7.5% of all Demon Hunters have a name that is a pun on Illidan. that one is less surprising. What's more surprising is the fact that they've got the facilities to be able to calculate this, to go through them all. Must have some sort of bots that's able to do that. Because if 20% of all two-thirds of all accounts have got at least one demon hunter, then that's a hell of a lot of names of demon hunters to be going through. Wasn't me, by the way. My demon hunter is no pun or nothing clever about the name of my demon hunter, so I'm not responsible for that one. Now, last couple of things. On the issue of legendary items. So they repeated the idea that you will be able to, at some point, target specific ones to be able to farm specific ones. But they'd said this a few weeks before when they were talking about the fact that there will be new legendary items coming in Legion. So they said at that point, they'll help you out by letting you target certain ones. Doesn't necessarily mean it'll be a quick process getting them. And also, it doesn't necessarily mean the way you'll target the one you want will necessarily be by doing the content that you want. So I don't know how easy that's going to be. But they also said something that had me facepalm yet again. They teased us with the concept of crafted legendary items. Dear Lord, no. The problem is that they said in a separate piece that they want to make crafted items better in Legion. They just don't know how yet. And then when they start talking about crafted legendaries, I was just thinking, don't connect up those two ideas, please. Do not connect up those two ideas. I don't want a meeting where, say, Ian Hazakostas is saying, right, team, I want some really good ideas for crafted items. You know, they're sort of all right. I want to make them great. I want to make people excited about crafted items. What have you got? And at the end of the meeting, they go, do you know what? We've drawn a blank. Let's go do our backup plan of let's just have crafted legendaries. No. That opens up a huge can of worms, which I may talk about in its own video at some point. I'm not planning on immediately, so maybe I will, maybe I won't. But no. Now, the final one was related back to this panel that some of the founders and early employees of Blizzard were discussing the 25 years of Blizzard. Because it wasn't called Blizzard right in the early days, that was a couple of years later, but Blizzard, that's the company. Mike Morhaime, who is the current CEO and one of the founders, said something very, very interesting and something I think we can all get on board with, but it is something I'm going to keep biting them on the arse with forever after, because it doesn't look like, it's a philosophy that it doesn't look like everyone at the company buys into. He was asked the question about, Blizzard are synonymous with this idea of we'll bring it out when we're ready, right? We'll bring it out when it's done. They don't stick to definite time schedules because they don't like the idea of bringing out something when it's clearly not ready. Now, he said this relates back to in fact, it might have been their first game, The Lost Vikings, which I'd know nothing about. My first game for them was Warcraft. And they said they produced this game and then went off to whoever. And they were looking at it and going, oh, it could do with some improvements. And apparently Mike Morhaime was the guy who was going, what you want to buy? It's great. It's fantastic. But one of the others was saying, actually, no, we think they've got a point. And they redesigned the look of the Vikings and they redesigned some things to do with levels. A few other things as well were changed. And he agreed afterwards that actually that made the game a lot better. It was a much better game as a result of people who were not involved in the design process looking at it and making suggestions. And what he said was that has then fed into the Blizzard philosophy ever since. And it is why they have such extensive testing periods of alpha and beta where gamers who are not part of Blizzard will test things out and provide feedback. Which is the reason, I mean, I've talked about this before. This is very apparent about Blizzard because not all MMOs do this, not all games do this. And it's very apparent Blizzard are doing that, which is why the 1-year expansions were never going to work. Because the testing process just lasts too long. For them to be able to do that, it doesn't last too long because it's given us lots of time to give that feedback. And that is an excellent philosophy to have. I know when I do things myself, when I produce resources as a teacher, When I produce especially very detailed resources, I will give them someone else to look through before I go and reproduce them or photocopy or whatever I need to do to give them out to my students. I'm not saying I do it with absolutely everything, but when it's something like really in-depth, really important, I will give it to someone else to check. It's a standard practice in a lot of industries that you get one of your colleagues to check stuff through, because sometimes someone else can see things that you can't, having worked on it. So it's a really obvious philosophy to have, and it does pay dividends for them. So what am I going to bite them on the arse with? It's actually also equally apparent that some, not most, some people at Blizzard don't buy into the philosophy. And I've mentioned this before about them getting quite defensive about certain bits of feedback because it's like their thing. They thought it was a really great idea and they don't like the fact that actually the players don't like it and sometimes get quite defensive. But it's only a small number do this. It's always worth remembering that the vast majority of designers and developers do an amazing job and are responsible for World of Warcraft still holding its very lofty position in the world of MMOs today. And I think a lot of that comes from that philosophy, actually. That concept that we produce our stuff and it's good, but it can be better, and that's what we want the feedback for. That's why we have the extensive testing that goes on. So in terms of the sort of news that came out of day 2 that's sort of relevant, barring a couple of things that I do want to do specifically as separate videos over the next few days, that's what came out of day 2. I'd already done a video on what came out on day 1. That one's already up on my channel, so you can have a look at that as well. And of course there was a load of other stuff, but not necessarily related to World of Warcraft and PvE. There was lots of stuff on other games, there was lots of stuff on PvP, there was lots of stuff on the art thing. One thing that I will say, that I say not connected to my channel, that they made a real big show of, is that they've had a lot of some of their best people, Ian Hazacostas himself of course, rise to really prominent positions within Blizzard and do really great work, who themselves were players. So they're very keen that engineers and artists and designers and people like that, they do like recruit from people who play these games. In fact, they said something really interesting in that they actually recruit some people who've gone on to become designers directly from games that they themselves play anonymously. They play other games as well and sometimes come across people, they talked about guild leaders, but they come across people who have really interesting ideas and then, you know, get in touch with them and end up approaching them to work for Blizzard. So they are very keen to recruit from the player base, not just of their own games, but other games as well. So if you are a budding artist or designer, it is worth going back and really getting involved with doing stuff like that. Like they talked about one graphical artist in particular who works there now. I can't remember his name because I'm not really into that artist side of things. Who basically just produced a huge portfolio of Blizzard-inspired artwork, really good stuff, with a message on it saying, I love Blizzard games, and they look through it and go, oh, we need this person to work for us. So there we are in terms of what was discussed in day 2. There will be more targeted videos coming out on 2 or 3 of the points over the next week, but hopefully you found that interesting. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share, and until next time, I'll see you later.